On the afternoon of March 18th, 1925, something moved across the hills of southern Missouri that no one recognized as a tornado. It didn't look like one. It looked like fog, like low gray clouds rolling off the hills toward the farms below, like a mist that moved too fast. By the time anyone understood what it was already on top of them. In 3 hours and 45 minutes, it crossed 3 states. It traveled 219 miles. 695 people were dead. Entire towns ceased to exist. No warning had been issued. No warning could have been issued. The government had banned them. The towns of southern Illinois in 1925 were coal towns: Murphysboro, West Frankfort, DeSoto, Gorham, Parrish. These were not major cities. They were working communities built around the coal mines that powered the Midwest's industrial economy, dense grids of wooden homes, corner stores, churches, and school buildings. The kind of places where most people had lived their entire lives and expected to live the rest of them. Murphysboro, the largest of these communities, sat in Jackson County, Illinois, with a population of roughly 11,000 people. It had 3 school buildings, a railroad depot, machine shops, and a hospital. The main street had storefronts that had been open for decades. The M&O railroad yards at the edge of town employed hundreds of men. It was, by every measure, a stable American small city, the kind of place you didn't expect history to visit. The morning of March 18th was a Wednesday. Children went to school. Miners went underground. Farmers checked their fields. The sky was cloudy, and the air was warmer than usual for mid-March, a mild, forgettable, late winter day. The previous night had brought light snow flurries across southern Illinois, which had dusted the fields and vanished by morning. There was rain in the air. Nothing about it looked dangerous to people who watched the sky for a living. At the same time, conditions that none of those farmers could measure were aligning above them. The atmosphere over southern Illinois on March 18th was, by every meteorological measure, almost perfectly arranged for a catastrophic tornado. A trained forecaster looking at the morning data could have seen it building. But no trained forecaster was authorized to say so publicly. And no one in those towns was going to be told. Because in 1925, the United States Weather Bureau was legally prohibited from issuing tornado forecasts. The policy had been in place since 1887. In the 1880s, Army Signal Corps Sergeant John Finley had correctly predicted 28 tornadoes over the course of 2 months. The false alarms and the public panic that resulted from his warnings had so embarrassed the Weather Bureau that officials imposed a standing prohibition on tornado forecasting. The logic was straightforward. Warning people about tornadoes caused panic. The credibility of the institution mattered more than the accuracy of the alert. What no one accounted for was what would happen when the tornado actually came. On March 18th, 1925, the Weather Bureau had no system and no legal authority to tell a single person in Missouri, Illinois, or Indiana what was forming in the hills to the south. A morning weather observation at 7 a.m. showed surface pressure readings that were unremarkable. No meteorologist raised an alarm. By noon, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Nobody with a public voice was watching. At 12:40 p.m., a condensation funnel touched down in Moore Township, Shannon County, in the forested hills of southeastern Missouri. A woman named Helen Thompson, near the town of Ellington, spotted it at around 12:45 p.m. She had no way to call ahead. There were no sirens. There was no alert system in existence. There was nothing to do but watch. The tornado that would become known as the deadliest in American history had begun its march northeast. No one in its path knew it was coming. The first death came within 15 minutes. A farmer named Sam Flowers, caught in the open near Ellington, was struck and killed at approximately 1 p.m. He was the first of 695. From the beginning, the tri-state tornado didn't look like what it was. The funnel was buried inside a wall of heavy rain and airborne debris. There was no visible dark rope descending from the sky, no shape that anyone in 1925 would have recognized as danger. Witnesses described what they saw as a mass of boiling cloud at ground level, rolling fog, a gray shape that was moving fast and getting bigger. That was all the warning anyone got. By the time that shape was recognizable for what it was already arriving, and it was moving very fast. The average tornado travels around 30 miles per hour. A person on horseback or in an early automobile could theoretically outpace it. The tri-state tornado moved at an average forward speed of 59 miles per hour. At peak, it reached 73. No horse on a farm road in 1925 was going to outrun it. No car on those dirt tracks had a chance. Most people didn't even know to try. By 1:57 p.m., it had reached the Conrad School in Bollinger County, Missouri. 18 children were injured. One child died the next day. Near the town of Bill, an infant was lifted from the Geringer family farm. The baby was carried nearly 1,200 yards, 3/4 of a mile, across the open fields and set down on the neighboring Pingle farm. The child was found alive. Not a scratch on it. The tornado crossed the Mississippi River into Illinois. In the town of Gorham, population just over 300, 60 of 80 houses were destroyed in the minutes the tornado passed through. 36 people died. The post office and the railroad depot were the only buildings left standing on the main street. 18 railroad cars were demolished. The locomotive itself was destroyed. Gorham's church was gone. Gorham's homes were gone. More than half of everyone who lived in Gorham was either dead or injured. The tornado paused for nothing. It had been on the ground for an hour and 45 minutes. It had traveled roughly 70 miles. It was not halfway done. Ahead of it lay Murphysboro. The people of Murphysboro had no idea. There had been no bulletin, no warning. A few people may have seen the sky darken in the southwest, may have felt the air pressure change in the way that experienced storm watchers sometimes can. But there was nothing official, nothing actionable. No alarm had sounded, because no alarm existed. Children were still in their classrooms. Miners were completing their shifts. The streets of the city were going about a normal Wednesday afternoon. At approximately 2:30 p.m., the front edge of the storm reached Murphysboro's southwest side. At approximately 2:30 p.m., the tri-state tornado entered Murphysboro from the southwest. It was, at this point, nearly a mile wide. In some sections of its path through the city, it spread to almost 2 miles across. Its winds were turning at an estimated 300 miles per hour. At the forward speed it was traveling, it crossed the entire width of Murphysboro in approximately 2 minutes. 2 minutes for 234 people to die. It hit the M&O railroad yards first. 35 men were killed in the machine shops and roundhouse in the opening seconds. Then it moved into the residential streets north of downtown, and entire rows of houses were not merely collapsed, they were removed, lifted from their foundations, broken apart, and deposited blocks away as debris. Trees along the streets were stripped of their bark by the abrasion of flying material. Vehicles were hurled across intersections. The damaged swath ran nearly a mile wide through the center of the city. Almost everything on the northwest side was gone. The schools were not spared. At Longfellow School, the building came apart while classes were in session. 17 children were killed. At Logan School, 9 more. At the high school, the top story was torn away entirely. 3 senior students died in the collapse. 29 children died in Murphysboro school buildings on the afternoon of March 18, 1925. They had been at their desks 2 minutes before. Then the fires started. The collapse of gas lines and the scatter of burning debris ignited fires in multiple locations simultaneously. The fire spread through the rubble, dry timber, coal dust, the compressed kindling of collapsed homes. Murphysboro's fire department, itself damaged in the storm, called for mutual aid. Dynamite was brought in to try to create fire breaks. to blow apart the rubble ahead of the flames and stop their advance. It did not work. The fires burned through the night. The tornado had already moved on. DeSoto, Illinois, was next. A smaller town, the storm virtually obliterated it. Most of the homes were swept away. 61 people were killed in DeSoto. But it is the school that history remembers. At the DeSoto School, the building partially collapsed during the tornado's passage. 33 students were killed inside. It remains the deadliest tornadic school disaster in United States history. On a single Wednesday afternoon, in a single building, 33 children died in their classrooms. Their school is gone now. Their names are recorded. They are a number that no storm in the century since has surpassed. Deputy Sheriff George Boland of Jackson County was at DeSoto when the tornado struck. He was lifted bodily into the funnel. His body was never found. The tornado carried him away completely. There was nothing left to bury. After DeSoto came West Frankfort, where 102 people died, and the surface structures of Orient Mine No. 2, at the time described as the largest coal mine in the world, were heavily damaged. 300 feet of railroad track were ripped from the ground and thrown aside. After West Frankfort came Caldwell, a small mining village. 45 people died. The Peabody Mine No. 18 was completely destroyed. Its 80-foot coal tipple, weighing several hundred tons, was pulled from its concrete foundation and rolled over. Isaac Carnes, the Caldwell storekeeper, survived. He emerged from cover and began looking for his family. 11 of them were already dead. 2 more died in the days that followed. 13 people, 1 family, 1 afternoon. Then Parrish, Illinois, completely destroyed. 28 killed on impact, 5 more later. The town's buildings did not collapse. They were removed. What had been a town was now open ground covered in rubble. Parrish, Illinois would never be rebuilt. Its people scattered to neighboring communities. Its name persists only in the record of what was lost. The tornado crossed the Wabash River into Indiana at approximately 4 p.m. It struck Griffin. Every structure in Griffin was destroyed or damaged. Not one building was left untouched. 46 people died. The town was, as witnesses described it, completely demolished. Then Princeton, where 44 more were killed. Then the storm began to lose coherence. At 4:30 p.m., near Oatsville in Pike County, Indiana, the tri-state tornado dissipated. 3 hours and 45 minutes. 3 states. 219 miles. It was over. The silence that replaced the tornado was almost as incomprehensible as the tornado itself. Communication lines were down across a corridor 200 miles long. The hospitals from St. Louis to Evansville were overwhelmed simultaneously. A 3-state region pouring its wounded into facilities built for ordinary Wednesday afternoons. Doctors and nurses arriving for evening shifts walked into scenes that had no frame of reference. The most critically injured were loaded onto whatever trains were still running and sent north to Barnes Hospital in St. Louis, to hospitals in Carbondale and Perryville, wherever space could be found. Many arrived with no one able to say which town they had come from. Murphysboro's hospital had no capacity for what was arriving at its doors. Hundreds of injured people had to be transported out of the city before the hospital could function at all. The fires that had started after the tornado continued to burn through the night. Dynamite was used and failed. By morning, the northwest side of Murphysboro looked like a city that had been shelled. Rubble covered the streets. Bodies were in the rubble. People were still trapped under collapsed walls. In DeSoto, rescuers reached the school and began the work of removing students from what remained of the building. 33 of them were already beyond help. The town around the school was gone, most of its homes swept away, its streets filled with debris that had arrived from somewhere else. The counting took weeks. Many of the dead had been carried distances by the tornado and were found in fields, drainage ditches, and the debris piles of properties far from where they had been standing when the storm struck. Some were never found at all. Deputy Sheriff George Bolin was not found. He had been lifted into the funnel near DeSoto, and whatever the tornado did with him, it kept. The final count settled at 695. Illinois alone, 588 dead. 85% of every person who died in a single state along a path that lasted 90 minutes. Murphysboro, the city that had seemed too large to disappear, 234. West Frankfort, the coal town, 102. DeSoto, where the school had been, 61. Caldwell, where Isaac Carnes had lost his family, 45. Gorham, where 60 of 80 houses no longer existed, 36. Parrish, which would not rebuild, 33. Missouri, 12. Indiana, 95. The numbers resist adding cleanly to 695. Some of the dead were carried far enough that no one was certain which town they belonged to. Approximately one-third of all victims were children. 90 people were killed in school buildings during class. 72 students died on their way home from school when the tornado struck. 57 schools across 3 states were damaged or destroyed. More schools and more student deaths than any other tornado in United States history, before or since. More than 2,000 people were injured and survived. More than 100 of them died of their injuries in the weeks that followed. The last was Gervais Burgess, a 46-year-old coal miner from West Frankfort. He had survived the tornado itself. He died on January 3, 1926, nearly 10 months later. He was the final entry in a death toll that had been accumulating since Sam Flowers fell in a Missouri field at 1 p.m. The economic damage reached $16.5 million in 1925 dollars, nearly $3 billion in today's money. 15,000 homes were destroyed. Mining infrastructure across 3 counties was severely damaged. Communities that had taken 2 generations to build were eliminated in an afternoon. Parrish, Illinois, did not rebuild. The people who had lived there left and did not come back. The land where Parrish stood became, over time, simply land. It is not a city now. It is a memory with a name attached to it. People died in the tri-state tornado. The question history requires us to ask is how many of them had to. The United States Weather Bureau had been prohibited from issuing tornado forecasts since 1887. Not discouraged, not advised against, prohibited. The reasoning had been settled 38 years before the tornado. False tornado alarms caused public panic, and the credibility of the Weather Bureau was more important than the accuracy of its warnings. Tornado prediction was embarrassing when the predictions were wrong. Therefore, predictions would not be made. The policy was never reviewed. It was never challenged in any meaningful way. It stood for 38 years, while American cities grew and school populations increased, and coal mines employed thousands of workers across the southern Midwest. On the morning of March 18, 1925, there were meteorologists in the United States who could see the atmospheric conditions building across the southern plains. The data existed: upper-level wind patterns, surface temperature gradients, pressure readings. All of it pointed towards severe weather potential. But no one with a public voice was authorized to say so. No bulletin could be written, no alert could go out. The prohibition stood. The towns in the tornado's path had, in practical terms, less warning than a medieval town would have had from a rider on horseback. At least a horseman could have ridden ahead. The tornado also defeated what little visual warning existed. It did not look like what it was. It moved wrapped in rain and debris and a curtain of storm cloud that concealed the funnel entirely. From a distance, it appeared as boiling fog moving fast across the fields, not the recognizable shape that anyone in 1925 associated with danger. By the time the sky above Murphysboro made clear what was coming, it was already inside the city limits. 2 failures combined: the policy that prevented any official warning and the atmospheric conditions that prevented any visual one. The result was 695 people who had no idea what was happening until it was happening to them. The Weather Bureau's prohibition on tornado forecasts remained in place after March 18, 1925. It would remain in place for 13 more years. In those 13 years, more tornadoes struck American communities. More Americans died without warning. The policy that had failed so visibly in 1925 continued to govern what forecasters were allowed to say until 1938. $16.5 million in 1925 dollars. Nearly $3 billion in today's money. 15,000 homes gone. And 695 people who went to work or school on a Wednesday morning in March and did not come home. The tornado was not the only disaster. The policy was a disaster too. The prohibition on tornado forecasts was finally lifted in 1938. 13 years after 695 people died without a warning, the United States government decided that it was permissible to tell Americans when a tornado might be coming. The first true tornado warning in United States history was issued in 1948 at Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma, 23 years after the tri-state tornado. 2 Air Force meteorologists predicted an approaching tornado with enough lead time to evacuate personnel from the flight line. It worked. The principle was proven. The modern tornado warning infrastructure, the Doppler radar network, the National Weather Service severe thunderstorm warning system, the outdoor sirens installed across the American Midwest, the emergency alerts sent to every phone in a warning polygon, all of it grew from the recognition that the 1925 approach had been a catastrophic failure. Today, the average lead time for a tornado warning in the United States is 13 minutes. Not always enough, but infinitely more than zero. The records set by the tri-state tornado of March 18, 1925 have never been broken. 695 dead, the highest death toll from a single tornado in United States history. A path of 219 miles, extended by later research to 235, the longest confirmed tornado track on record. A duration of 3 hours and 45 minutes, the longest in American history. In forward speed, in damage per mile, in the scale of what a single storm did to a single region in a single afternoon, March 18, 1925, remains the benchmark against which every tornado since has been measured. In Murphysboro, they rebuilt. New streets over old rubble. New schools where the old ones had stood. The city continued to exist because that is what cities do. There is a memorial. The names of the 234 dead are recorded. They are remembered by a city that survived to remember them. In DeSoto, they rebuilt the school. A new building stood for decades. It too eventually came down, not from any storm, but from time. The 33 names survived the building. In Parrish, there is nothing to rebuild. Parrish is not a city. It is the memory of one. The tri-state tornado of 1925 has held the record for the deadliest tornado in American history for more than a century. No storm has taken more lives from American soil in a single event. Not the Joplin tornado of 2011, with its 161 dead. Not the super outbreak of 1974. Not any storm in the 100 years since. 695 people. No warning. 3 states. One afternoon, the government had decided, 38 years before, that the warning might cause too much panic.